Hello, this is Mark Grier, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the June 18th issue of the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Okay, let's get started. First article. Trump's deal with Iran opens new rifts in the GOP. Some of the president's party were skeptical about whether the agreement he reached included adequate concessions from Iranian officials. President Trump's agreement with Iran opened new fissures in his party on Wednesday, with Republicans on Capitol Hill and beyond questioning whether his administration had secured adequate concessions from Iranian leaders after months of a costly and unpopular war. After the Trump administration released the text of the arrangement on Wednesday, some Senate Republicans reacted with fierce criticism, skepticism, and alarm. Prominent members of the GOP's old guard from outside Congress also sounded dubious notes, and even some of the president's allies in the conservative news media voiced concerns. Reagan is rolling over in his grave, said Senator Bill Cassidy, a Louisiana Republican who lost in a primary last month after Mr. Trump targeted him for defeat. He wrote on social media. He said that Iran's nuclear ambitions were not curbed, and that the country had learned that it could leverage the Strait of Hormuz, the oil shipping corridor that has been closed during the war and is set to reopen under the deal, to extract concessions. The war, Mr. Cassidy said, was the worst foreign policy blunder in decades. The reactions underscore a challenge Mr. Trump faces 5 months ahead of the midterm elections, and he works to free Republicans from the political albatross of the war while navigating varying views about it within his own party. While Mr. Trump has won praise for the deal from some Republican allies, consolidating support in a party with competing factions is proving to be a difficult task. At the start of the conflict, Mr. Trump angered some America First isolationists within the Make America Great movement who felt he was breaking his promise of starting no new wars. Now, as he tries to bring an end to the fight, he is facing pushback from more traditional conservatives who wonder if he has struck a deal that will ultimately be better than the one President Barack Obama reached with Iran a decade ago. Mr. Trump pulled the United States out of that framework in 2018. The preliminary agreement would lift sanctions on Iran and release billions of dollars in frozen Iranian assets. It would push talks about Iran's nuclear program into a 60-day negotiation period that could be extended by mutual consent. And it states that the United States and its regional partners would develop a $300 billion reconstruction plan for Iran. Some Republicans have said they were nervous about the prospect of such a fund. Mr. Trump on Wednesday insisted that the United States would not invest in it. It is giving $300 billion to Iranian Alatol, Senator Ted Cruz, Republican Texan, asked on his podcast. I hope not. I pray not, he said, even as he praised Mr. Trump's decision to take the United States to war, saying the president had utterly destroyed the Iranian military. Some of the most vocal criticism came from Republicans who have been pushed to the margins of the party by Mr. Trump. Senator Thom Tillis, a North Carolina Republican who is retiring, said there was a lot of work to be done to convince me that we're on the right path. Former Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, a Georgia Republican, who was once one of Mr. Trump's most vocal supporters, but has since broken with him, criticized the president in a video on social media for what she called a totally unnecessary war. This apparently is what winning looks like, Ms. Greene said sarcastically. Nikki Haley, who served as UN ambassador in Mr. Trump's first administration and lost to him in the 2024 Republican presidential race, wrote on social media that hitting Iran's nuclear and missile sites was the right move. But she added, "It's a huge mistake to pay to rebuild the threat we just destroyed." Pushback has also shown up in other settings. On Wednesday morning, the front page of the New York Post offered a critical view of the administration. Trump devastated Iran, now he hits them with a love bomb, the right-leaning tabloid front page blared, above an image of a burning American flag and text saying that Mr. Trump's deal showered Iran's leaders with cash and no sanctions. Mark Levin, who hosts a Fox News program, said he found much to be concerned about in the agreement and wanted to see it amended. Mr. Trump attacked critics of the deal on Wednesday, calling them stupid and bad people, and declared that he had the support of the international community. He said carrying on the war would have satisfied a group of 10% of the people, but would have been the wrong thing to do. There are some people, some writers, and I thought were friends of mine, but I don't want them as friends anymore, the president said of his critics as he addressed reporters at the Group of Seven summit in France. Mr. Trump has shifted his objectives for the war with Iran over time, and some critics appear to be holding him to the goals he set in launching strikes on Iran in late February, including changing its regime, eliminating Iran as the global threat, and stopping its nuclear program. At the same time, many Republicans were eager to move on from the conflict before what could be challenging election for their party. Republican operatives say their party's performance in November will depend heavily on whether energy prices fall in the coming months. The lower the gas prices are in November, the better Republicans will do, said Corey Bliss, a Republican strategist. The price of a gallon of gasoline is up nearly $1 over last year's, according to the AAA Motor Club. The energy prices overall are up 23.5% from a year earlier, according to the Consumer Price Index. Democrats have invested in advertisements pinning higher costs at the pump on the conflict. Republican lawmakers in swing districts had said for weeks that they were eager to see a swift end to the war. Some Republicans on Capitol Hill have hailed the deal as a significant achievement. Senator Tim Scott, the South Carolina Republican who leads the Senate Republicans' campaign arm, said on social media earlier this week that Mr. Trump had secured a major victory for American security and global stability. Senator John Cornyn, a Texan Republican who recently lost a primary to a Trump-backed rival, took a more measured position, saying the president should be congratulated for degrading their capability of waging war against the West and Israel. I think it's just an intermission in the continuing conflict that's been going on since 1979, and I wish we would basically encapsulate them, but that hasn't been possible, he told reporters on Wednesday. Senator Lindsey Graham, a Republican from South Carolina, who had long pushed for the United States to strike Iran, was initially skeptical about the deal when Mr. Trump announced it on Sunday without disclosing details. I am somewhat concerned that Iran's view of the agreement seems different than what the American negotiation team is claiming, Mr. Graham said Sunday on social media. On Wednesday, he expressed some degree of optimism. Whether or not the United States can reach an acceptable, verifiable deal with Iran regarding its nuclear program and other issues is yet to be determined, he wrote on social media. But I see little downside to trying. Okay, next article on a similar topic. Israel stunned by Trump's Iran deal, sees it as a catastrophic capitulation. Analysts said the agreement accomplishes none of Israel's war aims and leaves the country in worse shape on each of them. Israel awoke to a frightening new reality on Thursday as it absorbed with disbelief and largely in silence the terms of President Trump's agreement to end the war with Iran. It is a disastrous deal from Israel's point of view, analysts said, because it accomplishes none of Israel's war aims and arguably leaves the country in worse shape on each of them. It's a bad agreement in which the Americans are paying with cash and got, at the maximum, a letter of intent, said the hawkish former national security advisor to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel. He said this in an interview. David Horowitz, the editor of the Times of Israel, called it a catastrophic capitulation in the headline of a lengthy opinion column. And Nir Navari, an analyst for Israel's Channel 12 News, likened the deal to a diplomatic October 7th, a catastrophic disaster for which Israel was wholly unprepared. Regime change? The government in Tehran is emerging from the war even more hardline and emboldened, despite being decapitated at the outset of the conflict in late February. Some analysts said Iran had effectively chased the U.S. military out of the region, given the deal's requirement that American forces retreat from the proximity of Iran within 30 days. Ballistic missiles and proxy militias. The agreement does nothing to address Iran's missile arsenal or its support of Israel's enemies, like Hezbollah in Lebanon and the Houthis in Yemen. Worse, by constraining Israeli military action in Lebanon, indeed by requiring that Israel withdraw its forces from that country, it seeks to handcuff Israel in a way that it was not before the war began. The hundreds of billions of dollars that Iran could receive in sanctions relief, unfrozen assets, or reconstruction aid could wind up funding more missiles in Iran and aiding Tehran's militia allies around the Middle East. And Iran's nuclear program? Well, the existential threat to Israel that Mr. Netanyahu tried to eliminate throughout his career, and which was Mr. Trump's primary reason for joining the wars in Iran, was left for a later stage of U.S.-Iran negotiations. Mr. Netanyahu, the top officials in his government, offered no public comment on the agreement overnight, leaving minor ministers and backbench lawyers to put the best possible face on it. Amichia Chikla, the Diaspora Affairs Minister, speculated in a radio interview that Mr. Netanyahu, who would know how to say no to Mr. Trump about pulling out of Lebanon, just as he knew how to bring the United States into the war. But others, more soberly grappling with the degree to which Mr. Netanyahu triumphist rhetoric from earlier in the war had proved fantastical. He had repeatedly and confidently assured Israelis that the country and its alliance with the United States were changing the face of the Middle East to Israel's advantage. We are remaking the region, Chuck Freilich, a former Israeli deputy national security advisor, said on Thursday. Iran came out stronger, and I believe is now the regional hegemon, he added. They stood up to the U.S., the global superpower. They can have missiles, and there's nothing in the agreement about the nuclear issue except we'll talk about it. This is an Iranian victory over the U.S. and Israel. Okay, next article. Average U.S. gasoline prices, falls below $4 for the first time in months. Drivers are enjoying some relief at the pump after the United States and Iran signed an agreement to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. The average price of U.S. gasoline fell below $4 a gallon on Thursday for the first time in months, after Iran and the United States signed a preliminary agreement to cease hostilities for 60 days and reopen the Strait of Hormuz. The national average for a gallon of regular gasoline fell to a fraction of a penny below $4, down from $4.03 the day before, according to the AAA Motor Club. Still, gas prices hovered just below $3 a gallon before the first U.S.-Israeli strikes on Iran in late February. They spiked to around $4.50 a gallon in May, as throttled energy supplies from the Middle East pushed up the price of crude oil, a crucial ingredient in gasoline. Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif of Pakistan, which helped mediate the deal, said in a post on X that the Memorandum of Understanding had been signed electronically, by the U.S. and Iranian presidents. As a result, the agreement to begin reopening the strait and lifting the U.S. naval blockade would enter into force with immediate effect, he wrote. Rising fuel costs have strained household budgets and pushed up prices across the economy. At one point, in the early days of the war, oil prices spiked to nearly $120 a barrel, the highest level since Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022, contributing to a sharp increase at the pump. Oil prices have fallen about 10% this week alone. Even so, gas prices remain about a third higher than before the start of the war. We're getting close to the numbers we were before the war started, President Trump said on Monday in France at the annual Group of Seven summit. Other fuel prices are also beginning to ease. Diesel costs $5.13 a gallon on Thursday, down from more than $5.60 a gallon a month ago, offering relief to truckers, farmers, and other big users of fuel. High gas prices have bled into Americans' lives beyond the pump, including travel. For example, airfares were up nearly 27% in May, owed in part to surging jet fuel costs. Economists caution that it takes time to lower oil prices to be reflected fully at the cost of gasoline. Regional differences remain significant, driven by variations in state taxes, distribution costs, and refining capacities. Drivers in parts of the Great Plains and the South have been among the first to see prices drop below $4, with some areas approaching $3.50 a gallon. On the West Coast, however, prices remain well above $4 a gallon. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Okay, next article. Trump feuds with Thune and GOP, stoking election year rift. The president upended the majority leader's plans by yanking his intelligence nominee from a confirmation hearing and insisting to an end to the filibuster. President Trump may be trying to wind down his conflict with Iran, but he is escalating his war with Senate Republicans. Mr. Trump blindsided his supposed allies in the Senate on Wednesday with a rocket of social media posts from across the Atlantic, tying together a host of his pet peeves about the Senate while yanking his new nominee for National Intelligence Director from his confirmation hearing just hours before it was to occur. It was an extraordinary move from a president whose own party controls the chamber. but just the latest sign of a major rupture between Mr. Trump and GOP senators as the midterm elections approach. Mr. Trump's Mr. Trump's abrupt announcement pulled the rug out from under the carefully laid plans of Senator John Thune, the South Dakota Republican and Majority Leader. He had been toiling to clean up yet another mess the president created for his party last week when he named his loyalist, Bill Pulte, to serve as the Director of National Intelligence. Mr. Thune had been moving expeditiously to confirm Jay Clayton for the post to avoid an ugly confrontation over the temporary installation of Mr. Pulte, who is opposed by members of both parties. Mr. Thune's plan was working. Democrats who have almost uniformly opposed Mr. Trump's nominees, suggesting they would cooperate with the rapid confirmation of Mr. Clayton until the president stepped in. On top of pulling back his nominee, Mr. Trump piled on even more stringent conditions. He demanded that Senate Republicans attach stalled legislation on voting restrictions to a critical surveillance bill and insisted that he would not move forward with Mr. Clayton until his replacement as the U.S. Attorney was confirmed, a process that would take weeks at a minimum and would face Democratic resistance. Doing so would also likely require Senate Republicans to jettison both the chamber's signature filibuster and the Judiciary Committee's so-called blue slip tradition, which gives home state senators veto power over federal district court judges, United States attorneys, and federal marshals. Mr. Thune has staked his reputation as a Senate leader on preserving the legislative filibuster. So in essence, the president was demanding that Mr. Thune torch his own legacy for a voting measure that so far has not drawn sufficient support to pass. The remarkable Senate tumult imperiled an expired intelligence law and shifted the political conversation away from the GOP's preferred midterm message on tax cuts and affordability. But the tensions has been rising for weeks after Mr. Trump endorsed the primary opponents of two GOP incumbents who subsequently lost. Those moves were seen by many Republicans as slaps at Mr. Thune and clear indications that the president was putting his personal political grievances and desires ahead of the interests of the party. Senate Republicans have also raised objections to the president's Ballroom Project, a proposed fund to pay damages to January 6 defendants, the special protection from tax audits he has given by the Department of Justice, as well as the selection of Mr. Pulte, and many of them, including Mr. Thune, have declined to praise his ceasefire deal with Iran, noting that they had not been briefed on it. Asked on Wednesday what he thought Mr. Trump was trying to achieve with his machinations, Mr. Thune had a brief response. "Good question," he said. Mr. Trump has shown dissatisfaction with Mr. Thune recently, with public slights such as failing to give him advance knowledge of Mr. Clayton's selection last week and being slow to share information with the Senate leadership about the emerging agreement with Iran. Mr. Thune has also shown more willingness in recent days to push back against Mr. Trump, no matter the fallout, a development that no doubt does not sit well with the president. Senate Republicans privately suggested that Mr. Trump's ire could have been fueled by Mr. Thune's rush to join with Democrats to circumvent the possibility of Mr. Pulte serving even a day as National Intelligence Director, a direct challenge to Mr. Trump's discretion to pick the top members of his team. Whatever the reason, Senate Republicans said the discord was very unsettling. The president has put Leader Thune in a very difficult position, said Senator Susan Collins, Republican of Maine. When there are posts in the middle of the night asking for a total change in direction, it makes committees very chaotic. Asked to describe the dynamic between the White House and the Senate Republicans at the moment, Senator Thom Tillis, Republican of North Carolina, replied, "Less than optimal." "I think it's a bad move," Mr. Tillis said of the president's decision to delay the confirmation hearing. He criticized Mr. Pulte as a sycophant and said Trump's actions were undermining our ability to produce the results that he wants. Mr. Trump has, since his first term, been aggravated by resistance in the Senate, which operates according to consensus rather than raw majority rule. Mr. Thune's low-key pragmatism and efforts to preserve the Senate's prerogatives in the face of the president's demands have been particularly infuriating to Mr. Trump, standing in stark contrast to what he has incurred in the House, where Speaker Mike Johnson takes pains to do whatever the president asks. Senator Mitch McConnell, the Kentucky Republican and Mr. Thune's predecessor, flatly refused to consider weakening the filibuster, and he and Mr. Trump diverged on issues after working together to confirm scores of conservative judges. Mr. Thune has instead tried to explain the vote tallies and the workings of the Senate to the president as a way of justifying why he cannot always deliver what Mr. Trump wants, as he did during an interview on Tuesday night on Fox News. There are times when, for reasons of how the Senate functions, the answer isn't always yes to the things that he wants to do, Mr. Thune said in the interview. But we do everything we can to work constructively with him and his team to ensure that we are moving the country forward. Mr. Thune has also tried to impress upon Mr. Trump that Republican senators were declining to gut the filibuster or abandon the blue slip veto power because they fear that once Democrats regain power, they would then have the power to push through progressive legislation and judges that would be against Republicans. The filibuster and the blue slip are also procedural weapons that empower individual senators who are very reluctant to sacrifice such leverage. Okay, next article. The Knicks accept a White House invitation to celebrate title, owner says. James Dolan said he was very proud to bring his championship team to Washington. It would be the first NBA team to visit the White House with Mr. Trump as president. The Knicks have accepted an invitation to visit the White House and celebrate their first championship in more than 50 years, James Dolan, the team's owner, said in a radio interview on Wednesday. The Knicks would become the first NBA team to visit the White House in President Trump's tenure. During his first term, Mr. Trump publicly sparred with the league's top players, who refused to go to the White House. But Mr. Dolan, a longtime friend of Mr. Trump, said during an interview on WFAN, a sports radio station, that the team would be visiting Washington. I've known him for 30 years, and I'm very proud to bring the team to the White House, Mr. Dolan said. The White House officials said that the administration had been in communication with the Knicks and that officials expect to host the team in the near future. A date has not been determined, according to the official, who spoke on the condition of remaining anonymous. Mr. Trump attended Game 3 of the finals at Madison Square Garden last week and sat with Mr. Dolan in a suite. The president was raucously booed when he was shown on the arena's video board. It was the only game that the Knicks lost during the series, which they won in 5 games against the San Antonio Spurs. Championship teams across professional and amateur sports have visited the White House for decades, but the practice grew less common and strongly publicized after Mr. Trump became president. That shift was perhaps most pronounced in the NBA, with many professional basketball players and coaches who supported Democrats denouncing Mr. Trump's policies and rhetoric, particularly regarding social justice issues. In 2017, during his first term, Mr. Trump publicly sparred with players such as Stephen Curry and LeBron James. Mr. Curry, who helped lead the Golden State Warriors to an NBA championship, said that he would not accept an invitation to visit the White House. In response, Mr. Trump wrote in a post on Twitter that the invitation was withdrawn. The next year, the commissioner of the NBA, Adam Silver, told ESPN that he found a disparaging remark the president had made about immigration to be discouraging. In 2024, Mr. Silver donated thousands of dollars to Kamala Harris, Mr. Trump's opponent in the general election, as well as to other Democrats. He also donated a few $1,000s to Nikki Haley's Republican presidential primary campaign. Mr. Dolan got married at Mr. Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort. He told ESPN in 2018 and defended the president in an interview last week with WFAN, calling him a Knicks fan. In that same interview, he attacked Mayor Mamdani and Jessica Tisch, the police commissioner, as fake Knicks fans and novices. Mr. Trump often attended games at Madison Square Garden during the 1990s, when the team developed a reputation as a physical, tough-minded group and made the finals twice. He has praised the current team, including its star players like Jalen Brunson and Karl Anthony Towns, as it tore through the playoffs this spring. During an interview on Inside the NBA on the Madison Square Garden court at Game 3, Mr. Silver described Mr. Trump's visit as a unifying event. He touted Mr. Trump's bona fides as a Knicks supporter. He was a fixture at the Madison Square Garden, Mr. Silver said. He's a genuine Knicks fan. All right, next article. Presidents line up for Obama's long-awaited center in Chicago. Today's opening is expected to draw 4 former presidents, as well as Bruce Springsteen, Bono, and Jennifer Hudson. Chicago has seen years of planning and legal fights. It took more than a decade of planning, a messy court battle with preservationists, and years of plotting construction. But the Obama Presidential Center will finally be unveiled on the south side of Chicago on Thursday. The opening itself will be a star-studded party, concert, and celebration. The rare event that is expected to draw 4 former presidents, George W. Bush, Bill Clinton, and Joe Biden, along with Barack Obama himself. An invitation was not extended to Mr. Trump, who recently compared the center to a trash heap. Bruce Springsteen, Bono, and Jennifer Hudson will perform. Senators raced to show up for votes in Washington on Wednesday so they could hop on planes to Chicago. For Chicagoans, the opening of the $850 million, 19-acre museum campus has been a long time coming. It was 2 years ago, in 2015, when President Obama announced that the museum would be built in his adopted hometown of Chicago. Since then, the museum and everything that has come with it, a playground, a public library, a sledding hill, has slowly come together in Jackson Park, near the University of Chicago campus. The museum is not just a reminder of Mr. Obama's presidency, said Rahm Emanuel, the former chief of staff in Obama's White House, who was also mayor of Chicago in 2015 and helped with what he called the hustle, calculation, maneuvering, and jostling to bring the museum to the city. For the city as a whole, it's a $1 billion infusion of an investment that pays dividends way beyond the $1 billion, specifically on the south side, said Mr. Emanuel. This is generational. The Obama Foundation, which has paid for the new center with private donations, said that 250 people would work at the museum, and 1 million people were expected to visit the campus each year. Tickets are $30 for adults and $26 for Illinois residents. On the eve of the opening, as Chicago was drenched by a heavy summer rain, workers scoured outside the center in Jackson Park, putting finishing touches on preparations, as streets nearby were blocked off in anticipation of the crush of visitors on Thursday. On the grassy expanse of the Midway Plaisance nearby, a giant screen was erected to broadcast the ceremony to Chicagoans who wished to gather and watch from the lawn. Even in the pouring rain, visitors near the museum angled for a glimpse of it from behind the imposing barricades. Tariq Atiyah, a writer from McLean, Virginia, had just arrived in Chicago on a train from upstate New York solely to have a look at the museum. He had no particular agenda other than looking at the museum from the outside, he said, straining to read the text imprinted on the outside of the 225-foot granite-covered tower that is sometimes called the Obamalisk. More than anything, Mr. Atiyah said, he hoped the museum would live up to its promise. I hope it builds community, he said. Alexei Giannoulis, the Illinois Secretary of State and a longtime friend of Mr. Obama, said he had been inundated by friends and acquaintances who were asking for help securing tickets to the museum. Tickets are already sold out through November. Mr. Giannoulis brought his family for a sneak peek of the museum last month and found himself moved to tears, he said. The museum will bring visitors and investment to the South Side, celebrate a historic presidency with deep roots in our city, and serve as a reminder that the city remains a place where big ideas and big projects can thrive, he said, adding that the center brought a certain sense of pride to Chicagoans because of Mr. Obama's connection to the city. The Obamas have always emphasized that this museum was not intended to be a traditional presidential library, but also a community hub, a sprawling campus with a garden, a basketball court, and performance spaces. Mr. Obama's records will be stored by the National Archives. The museum was built along Lake Michigan in Jackson Park, at the edges of a woodlawn and South Shore neighborhoods that experience frequent gun violence. In April, a 16-year-old boy waiting for a bus outside Hyde Park Academy was shot to death, just 2 blocks from the presidential center. Residents said they had mixed feelings about the museum, hope that it will bring more development to the neighborhood, but also fear that it will usher in so much gentrification that their rents will go up. The Reverend Corey Brooks, a conservative pastor in neighboring Woodlawns, has been a frequent critic of the center, questioning whether it will have a positive impact on the residents who live in the community. But he said he had received invitation to the opening ceremony and intended to be there. Anything they spend $800 million on in our neighborhood makes it imperative that I see it, he said. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Okay, next article. Warsh wants the Fed to send fewer signals. That comes with risks. Investors piled on bets for higher borrowing costs after Kevin Warsh opted against providing policy guidance at his first meeting as Fed chairman. Financial markets wasted little time on Wednesday filling a void left by Kevin Warsh during his first news conference as chairman of the Federal Reserve. Mr. Warsh kept his views on the path for interest rates closely held during the 42-minute exchange with reporters, providing little steer in either direction about what might happen to monetary policy in the coming months. As if to drive home the point, he declined to submit economic projections as part of a quarterly release to Fed publishes. The policy statement was also significantly scaled back. Investors, cutting from the new set of projections, which showed a ground swell of support for rate increases this year, quickly piled on bets for higher borrowing costs. The yield on 2-year U.S. Treasury bonds, which are highly sensitive to changes in the Fed's stance, leaped higher to roughly 14.2%. Markets tracking federal funds futures also moved sharply, indicating elevated odds of a September move and one fully priced in by October. Mr. Warsh's approach has the benefit of carving out significant flexibility for the Fed in terms of what it does next, but it also raises the risk that the Fed chairman will not have as firm a grip on the narrative that takes hold about either the trajectory of the economy or the central bank's policy response. That, in turn, could create greater scope for some kind of misunderstanding that then needs to be resolved, leading to greater volatility in the markets that directly influence mortgage rates and those for other types of borrowing. By not saying anything, you are basically leaving a lot more of in the hands of the market, says Mark Gianelli, chief U.S. economist for the Barclays. Ultimately, he might grow frustrated with what the market is thinking about the future. The genesis of Mr. Warsh's view, which will be examined in greater depth as one of 5 task forces that he announced on Wednesday, stems from his long-standing view that Fed officials should be more guarded in what they share. When policymakers speak about the economic outlook or their expectations for rates, Mr. Warsh believes that they convey a false precision that can end up backfiring on the central bank if the economy does not evolve as expected. Proponents of this practice, both inside and outside the Fed, however, contend that providing guidance helps the central bank to do its job effectively, something that might be lost if it is jettisoned altogether. That is in part why the central bank embraced transparency more than a decade ago under then-chair Ben Bernanke. His predecessors, Janet Yellen and Jerome Powell, later expanded on it. It's considered just more efficient if markets can react to incoming data and news with knowledge of the central bank's reaction function, said Jonathan Pingle, who used to work at the Fed and is now the chief U.S. economist at UBS. Otherwise, he said, you would end up with periods where you're unaligned and need to be realigned. Tim Mahedi, chief economist at Axis Macro, a research firm, who formerly worked at the Fed Reserve Bank of San Francisco, likened Mr. Warsh's approach to turning back the clock. We're going to be parsing through comments trying to figure out what the reaction function is, he said. It's just like 1995 again. The added complication for Mr. Warsh is that his penchant for silence does not appear to be shared by his colleagues. Presidents at the 12 regional reserve banks and members of the Board of Governors in Washington speak with regularity about the outlook and how policies might evolve given certain circumstances. Quiet is not a feature of modern central banking, and his core problem is those with a different view from him will fill the vacuum, said Vincent Reinhart, a former Fed economist now at BNY Investments. Mr. Reinhart expected the most vocal people to be those who have embraced the need for rate increases, a cohort that has grown significantly in recent months. As of the latest projections, 9 policy forecasts at least 1/4 point increase this year, while 8 penciled in no reductions at all. Only one person penciled in a 1/4 point cut. Those in favor of rate increases are primarily concerned about the recent deterioration of inflation because of the war in Iran and the lengthy process ahead to get it back to 2%. Mr. Warsh has sought to convey in as strong of terms his displeasure with this lingering inflation problem, vowing repeatedly that the Fed would deliver price stability. But in his sparse statements on the economic backdrop, he could not completely obscure his leaning against rate increases. Mr. Warsh stressed how supply-related factors such as the energy shock caused by the conflict in the Middle East had driven up price increases. He made clear he did not see a cruel choice between inflation and the labor market, suggesting he believes the economy can grow without stoking price measures. Mr. Warsh also sounded optimistic about the prospects that artificial intelligence will increase productivity, an argument that he has previously used to make the case for rate cuts. Lastly, he argued that rates were restraining some sectors of the economy, such as housing, although he conceded that it has been uneven. Seth Carpenter, a former Fed economist who is now at Morgan Stanley, warned that Mr. Warsh's pledge for price stability has a shelf life. If the inflation data takes another turn for the worse, that might require Mr. Warsh to break his own rule and speak out about the Fed's policy plans. If they keep saying that inflation starts to rise, then I think it is necessary to put some action behind the words to keep the market believing it, said Mr. Carpenter, who, as of now, still believes the Fed will keep rates on hold for the remainder of the year. All right, moving on. Next article. Retail investors help send SpaceX shares soaring. The company's blockbuster trading debut is the latest example of how individual investors have become a force in financial markets. The day he heard SpaceX was going public, Kevin Conlon knew he wanted to buy into what he believed could be a transformative company focused on space and technology. On Friday, the company's first day of trading, Mr. Conlon, 70, placed 3 orders to purchase about $10,000 worth of its shares. I know, the dude's a little crazy, Mr. Conlon said of SpaceX chief executive Elon Musk, but people like Howard Hughes were crazy. Mr. Conlon, who lives in Northern California, is among the legions of individual investors who helped drive SpaceX's stock to dizzying heights during its first few days in public company. Its shares are now over 40% higher than their initial public offering price. SpaceX briefly became one of the 5 most valuable companies on Tuesday, leapfrogging Amazon and coming close to topping Microsoft. On Wednesday, the company's stock fell for the first time, dropping 5%, amid a broader market sell-off driven by expectations of higher interest rates. Since Friday, SpaceX has been the most bought stock for retail investors each day, according to data from Vanda Research, a company that specializes in tracking retail trading. After subtracting sellers from buyers, retail investors have bought a net $370 million of SpaceX since Friday, with Tuesday standing out as the biggest day of buying at $146 million, according to Vanda. That's more than the net retail buying of NVIDIA, Microsoft, Alphabet, Meta, and Amazon combined over the same period. We're running out of superlative to describe retail enthusiasm for SpaceX, the analyst at Varda said in a research note. SpaceX's blockbuster trading debut is the latest example of how retail investors have become a force in financial markets in recent years. Their influence rose during the coronavirus pandemic when many people stuck at home started to become interested in trading. Meme stocks like AMC Entertainment and GameStop, two struggling companies that had their fortunes transformed by individuals buying up their beaten down shares en masse, showed the market power of retail investors. They often make investments of only a few $1,000s at a time, but taken collectively, they can move a stock and even the broader market. Retail investors have been big supporters of Mr. Musk's over businesses like Tesla. The newly minted trillionaire had promised that they would be more involved in the SpaceX IPO, which valued the company at $1.77 trillion. That was typical. SpaceX allocated more than 20% of its shares to retail investors. The usual amount is around 5%. When the stock became available on Tuesday for options trading, derivatives that allow investors to bet on a company's value rising or falling without owning the stock itself, SpaceX broke further records, according to data from Kobe Global Markets. It became the most heavily traded new listing ever, surpassing Meta's debut on options markets in 2012. Jake Taylor, head of the U.S. single stock options at Optiver, described the trading activity as overwhelmingly bullish. At first, Lauren Civitas, 57, didn't tell anyone he had bought StockX stock last week. He said he was not a fan of Mr. Musk, but he couldn't resist buying into the SpaceX company. Mr. Civitas pays a financial planner to manage most of his investments, but keeps a small pool of money to play around with. He said he had received 11 of the 18 shares he had requested at the IPO and planned to wait until his money had doubled before selling it. Already his shares are up over 50%. It's not like I'm proud of it, he said, but it's doing well. The analysts at Varda Research noted that while individual investors' involvement in SpaceX had similarities to the rapidly appreciating stock valuations of the meme stock craze, the company was more akin to other tech behemoths that also attracted big retail bets. These companies are perceived as the vanguard of a future economy. Together, these companies sit at the forefront of AI and technology and are increasingly viewed by investors as the businesses most likely to shape the next decade, the analyst said. They suggested expanding the so-called Magnificent Seven stocks, NVIDIA, Microsoft, Alphabet, Amazon, Tesla, Apple, and Meta, to include SpaceX, as well as Anthropic and OpenAI, two large artificial intelligence companies that are planning public listings this year. The analysts proposed the moniker of the Fab 10 for this expanded group. Mr. Conlon, the retail investor from North Carolina, is not interested in SpaceX or Anthropic when it goes public as a fad or a meme. He is more focused on the long term, such as SpaceX's commitment to put data centers in space and the increasing dominance of artificial intelligence across the economy. I believe they're both inevitable, he said. Okay, this will probably be the last article for today. Billionaire tax officially has has enough signatures for California ballot. A proposed wealth tax on billionaires is headed to the ballot unless Governor Gavin Newsom and other opponents reach a deal with backers to remove it. A proposal to tax the wealth of billionaires in California has officially gathered enough signatures to appear on the November ballot, state officials announced on Wednesday. It isn't yet certain that the tax initiative will actually be voted on. However, several prominent Californians, including Governor Gavin Newsom, have vowed to defeat the measure, and they could strike a last-minute deal to remove it from voter consideration. Proponents have until June 25th to decide if they want to proceed with placing it on the ballot. The California Secretary of State, the top elected official, said Wednesday that her office verified that the labor union backing the proposal had collected more than enough signatures to clear the nearly $875,000 the $875,000 threshold to reach the ballot. If the measure does move forward, there almost certainly will be an expensive election fight in California. It would pit the economic anxieties of working-class Californians against some of the state's richest residents and business leaders, who say that such a tax would threaten California's long-standing dominance in tech innovation. The measure would also face opposition from unlikely groups such as the California Teachers Association and the California Medical Association, which represents doctors. The initiative would place a one-time 5% tax on the assets of California residents with at least $1.1 billion and would dedicate most of the revenue to health care. Those with between $1 billion and $1.1 billion would pay a lesser percentage. The union leading the campaign, Service Employees International Union, United Healthcare Workers West, argues that the tax is necessary to make up for cuts to Medicaid and other federal health insurance programs in the Republican domestic policy bill that President Trump signed last year. An analysis by the California Legislative Analyst's Office found that the proposed wealth tax would be likely to increase the state tax revenue by tens of billions of dollars over several years. That analysis also found, however, that the measure would decrease income tax revenue by hundreds of millions of dollars or more annually because some billionaires would leave the state. The proposal is designed to tax the wealth and not just the income of billionaires. Backers say that wealthy individuals currently have too many ways to limit their annual income and are able to shield most of their wealth from taxation. But tech leaders have said that the proposal could force them to liquidate investments in a way that could harm their companies. Some Democrats have backed the general idea of taxing billionaire wealth, but have said that this particular proposal is problematic, in part because it would dedicate the overwhelming share of revenue to healthcare instead of education or social services. Mr. Newsom strongly opposes the measure. He has said that even the floating of the idea had already hurt California by driving some billionaires to relocate, taking their tax dollars with them. The governor, a Democrat, has said he thinks a tax on billionaires should occur at the federal level rather than solely in California. This will be defeated. There's no question in my mind, Mr. Newsom previously told the Times. I'll do what I have to protect the state, he added. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the June 18th issue of the New York Times. Your reader today has been Mark Grier. Thank you so much for listening.